Marathon. I'm Mod Raven, this is Mod Stu, Mod KOC, and Mod Jack. We will be leading you through some new and interesting lore of RuneScape and going over some old lore. This is a 90-minute, roughly-ish, lore marathon. The subjects have been chosen by the players via Twitter, the forums, and a bit of Reddit. There are 2 Q&A sessions, one relatively short one and a longer one. For part 1, we'll be looking at an overview of some of the big players in terms of the gods. So we're looking at, Armadyl, Saradomin, Zamorak, and Zaros. We'll look at how the armies of some of the Third Age were structured. Should be quite interesting. And then we'll have a Q&A on the gods. And then part 2, we're looking at the cosmology of RuneScape, so the structure of the universe. RuneScape, the movie that never was. A little bit on some of the less discussed races, and a look at where some of the big players are, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A for any questions you might have regarding any subject to do with lore. Okay, so moving straight on to the gods of RuneScape, we're starting with Armadyl. So, woo! Yes! Right, so Armadyl, his philosophy is that he fundamentally wants to promote peace through mutual trust and understanding. This is the most important point with Armadyl, because everything kind of refers back to this point. So everything on this, so justice, it goes back to the sort of peace and understanding. Even his whole kind of not backing down from a fight goes back to peace and understanding, because you can't have peace and understanding if people think they can just walk all over you. This is why he always finishes a fight he starts, and he wants to protect his people, because again, all of this goes back to peace and understanding through trust. No, peace through trust and understanding. I'm trying to rush through this because I've taken too long previously. So, Armadyl's origins, obviously he came from the Aviancy world of Abinah, and he ascended by a method that we're too mean to tell you about just yet. However, one thing we wanted to point out is when he first ascended, he was a tier 5 god. So he was a lower tier than he is now. This is because there are some people making false assumptions about the Staff of Armadyl and the unknown artifact being used at the same time, which isn't quite true. After he ascended, after his immediate first ascension, he unified the Aviancy people. This is not like a unification in terms of them all being identical and all doing the exact same thing. What he did is he found a number of warring tribes, and he brought them together so they weren't murdering one another, which is, a pretty good feat in and of itself. It wasn't entirely bloodless. I know we've implied that he went, no, I will just talk, it'll be all nice and happy and clappy, and everyone will be friends, but that's not quite true. He then discovered the Staff of Armadyl. That is how he ascended to tier 4, but he wasn't before that. So there should hopefully be some questions you should be asking. So, where is Armadyl now? So he is, unsurprisingly, recovering from Siske's endgame. More than some of the other gods, Armadyl was hit by Siske's endgame. He was hit by the idea of becoming mortal briefly, even though it wasn't real mortality, it was a kind of depowering thing. And he's looking at it and going, I miss that. I miss being mortal. I miss this ability to connect with my fellow people, and he kind of craves it. I'm not saying there's any chance of getting it back, but this is where he is now. He's also looking to he's back to trying to save his people. He's remembered the bad things he's done and the loss he had before, and he now wants to completely reverse that, which is why he's looking at moving the Aviancy to Tarthiat, where he thinks there can be a good kind of mix. This is not going staggeringly well, because there are huge cultural issues to overcome. The elves are, as we all know, quite isolationist, and the idea of sort of giving up their homeworld to another race, even a race that seems relatively peaceful, is really not agreeing terribly well with them. And the Aviancy, of course, the idea of coming to a world full of, shape-shifting horrible monsters is not terribly fun, but they're working on it. This is where they are now. I will move on very quickly to Saradomin with Stu.
Thank you. Yeah, get it out of your system to get the booze out. It's all good. Saradomin is known as the god of order, but his followers have also glorified him as the god of wisdom, enlightenment, and benevolence. Saradomin is a frustrated sheriff in a lawless frontier town. His goal, his duty, is to protect his people and their home by any means necessary. He sees this as a heavy burden, but he strives to maintain order and ensure prosperity. It has been a long and weary battle. He has had to make difficult choices with regretful outcomes and live forever with the consequences. Saradomin has made sacrifices. There is blood on his hands, and countless have died in his name. Yet he must continue to hold back the tide of darkness, or Gillinor will be destroyed by jealous, lawless gods. Saradomin is one of the oldest lesser gods. He is much older than Guthix, and was active long before the First Age. Before his ascension, Saradomin was a citizen of Terragard, the human homeworld. He was a Justicar, a peacekeeper who upheld the laws of the land and enforced them. His fight against crime took its toll on himself and his family. Nonetheless, Saradomin risked his life each day to preserve order and protect the innocent. In pursuit of one such criminal, Saradomin discovered an artifact, a golden circlet that seemed to call out to him. It could sense in Saradomin his yearning for a better world. The crown granted him the power to tear apart the criminal underworld of Terragard that once seemed insurmountable. With the power of this crown, he was able to root out the corruption at the heart of Terragard's government. As his power grew, Saradomin united disparate nations and brought peace to Terragard. Later, he distributed his authority to 12 magisters, each mandated to improve humanity in line with Saradomin's philosophy. His people prospered, and Terragard entered a glorious age of enlightenment. Confident that his world, his home, was in safe hands, Saradomin turned his attention to other worlds in need of guidance and order.
Let's forget that blue guy, yeah? This big old red guy. This is Zamorak, the Marjarat god, and his philosophy is one of chaos. He's all about uprooting stability, making people overcome hardships, improving themselves, improving society by taking on challenges. You could say necessity is the mother of invention. It's a famous phrase. Let's take a look at some real-world examples. We have the magnetron. This was used and built for radar. This is used for warfare. But ultimately, it's the reason we have microwave ovens. Warfare here has resulted in something good for people. The same with the jet engine. The jet engine was used for warplanes originally. And now we have commercial travel. You can go on holiday to the other side of the globe if you like. So that's pretty good, right? So this kind of philosophy, how would you interpret it? Of course, you're advancing society, you're advancing technology, advancing science. Everything's getting better because people are having to overcome hardships. But the weak don't survive. Is that a moral choice you can keep up with? Are you happy to take that choice? And the other point to that, chaos equals evil. Some people have taken the chaotic kind of philosophy and used it to justify their own evil deeds. People who are against Zamorak or of opposing factions have used this as propaganda to say, this guy's a bad guy, you can't be doing this. It's not always good. Again, there's good sides and bad sides to this. So, some examples of this in action. We have the rebellion against Zaros. The empire was growing stale, everything was getting super, super easy for everybody, just living in the golden city of Sentistan. So he rebelled against Zaros with his armies, made a war against them after he ascended to godhood, and basically ended the complacency of the empire. Moving on from that, he took the Vernix slave race, raised them up from a pitiful horde, frankly, roused them, taught them to overthrow their captors, their enslavers, destroyed them, became a much hardier race through this philosophy. Again, the Marjarat in Children of Ma, doomed to this eventual slow decay and death, took it to Ma, sacrificed his own wings from a blast from Zaros in order to defend his people and give them the courage to continue. So, where are we now with Zamorak? He's chilling in Demonheim. He's pretty happy down there with his allies, musing about what he might do next. He's been on a bit of a roller coaster recently with the Battle of Lumbridge, losing that fight, losing much of his power. Again, gaining it back with the heist for the Stone of Jazz. And again, in Children of Ma, taking a hit. Been up and down quite a bit, but he's always looking for the opportunity. He's up for the challenge, and the next thing is on the horizon, he'll be straight on it.
I don't know why we're even talking about these other gods. Let's get to the good bit. Zaros. Zaros! Hey, that's good. But really, what can we say about Zaros that we haven't already said? I mean, mystery is a huge part of his identity, his origins, his objectives. So what can we say? And what we can say about Zaros is that he's someone who's desperate to escape his past, but ultimately been consumed by it. Because Zaros was created as a toy by his mother, created as a plaything just to amuse her. He was a being who was absolutely controlled. And this was unacceptable to him. He didn't want to be controlled, and so he left. But he ended up becoming his mother, because all he can do is control. All he can do is control others, and he has no real problem with that. Right, that's it. So, something else we've been thinking about recently is a hugely important part of our history is the God Wars. We know about it, we've got a whole dungeon about it, but we really haven't thought very much about it. And so, to look at who Saradomin and Zamorak are now, we have to look at who they were in the past. And so we've been looking at particularly the critical confrontations that took place towards the end of the Third Age as the Saradominists pushed the Zamorakians back into foreignry. So I'm going to have a look at a battle between a Third Age Saradominist army and a Third Age Zamorakian army, which I can illustrate for you using this blank slide here. So as you see the forces take to the battlefield, what we have first are the scouts meeting each other. We have the Saradominist scouts, the Prodromoi, and the Zamorakian scouts, the Speculatores, are scouting each other out. These are both fast flying forces looking for enemy forces, scouting around. And these also start to illustrate very important differences between the armies of Saradomin and Zamorak. So the Saradominist scouts are always Icene. Saradomin believes very strongly that each race has strengths and weaknesses, that he knows what they are, and that they should do as they're told. Zamorak, by comparison, will let anyone do anything as long as they're capable of it. He's very much about opportunity. So in the Zamorakian scouts, anyone who's fast, anyone who can fly, anyone who's got good observational skills, be they human, demon, vampire, can serve as one of his scouts. The Prodromoi hold a special place in Saradominist society in the Third Age because they're the folk heroes of the Saradominist people. They're legendary for arriving, finding out some monster is attacking the town, or there's some terrible bandit chieftain or something, saving the town and being lauded for their heroism. So these aren't necessarily true stories, but they're what the Saradominists believe. The other thing you can see here is the language that they're using. So the Saradominists of the Third Age and of the Second Age aren't human culture, although there's a lot of humans in the empire, in Saradomin's empire. They are speaking the Icene language, because Saradomin rejected human culture and adopted Icene culture. And so we represent that in RuneScape with Greek. So there's a very strong Greek influence to the Saradominists. The Zamorakians, by comparison, are all speaking Latin. And some people say, well, why are the Zamorakians speaking Latin? Wasn't that the language of the Zerosian Empire? But it was the language of the demons. It was the language the Marjarat learned. Zamorak doesn't care about inventing a new language when he's already got one. So they're still speaking the same language that the Zerosians did. The next thing that arrive on the battlefield are the line forces of each army. So on the Saradominist side, we have a huge mass of shield and spear armed human infantry. Again, remember Saradomin thinks that each race is only good for one thing, and what he thinks that humans are good for are standing in a line and getting in everyone's way. So the job of the phalanx is to dominate the battlefield, to stand there, completely immobile, prevent the enemy battle line from accomplishing anything, while in Saradomin's eyes the more important race is get the job done. Zamorak, by comparison, has a very heavily disciplined and drilled force of expert soldiers called the milites. They're sometimes referred to as legionaries, but technically every Zamorakian soldier is a legionary, and these are milites. Now you may think disciplined and drilled forces for the god of chaos, that's a bit strange. But Zamorak isn't the god of disorganization, he's the god of strife and of accomplishing things through strife. And what Zamorak found in his thousands of years of leading Zaros' armies on the battlefield is that drilling and discipline and organization are what get the job done. And so that's what Zamorak does, because he'll do whatever it takes to get the job done. So Zamorak's armies are some of the most disciplined forces. And so you'll see, rather than being arranged into one large mass of troops that's immobile and impossible to maneuver on the battlefield, his forces are arranged into much smaller units that are capable of independent maneuvering and complex tactics on the battlefield. They're also, again, although there are a lot of humans, you'll find demons there, you'll find vampires there. Anyone who wants to serve on the line can do so. Isn't working. Next, we've got ranged forces. They need to be supported by ranged forces. So on the Saradominist side, you've got the few remaining dwarves. So by this point in the Third Age, most of the dwarves are either dead or underground and hiding. The few remaining dwarves who are still loyal and actively serving Saradomin are, of course, the... Mine's gone blank. Camno, who are building huge war machines. That's what they love doing. But they do have a good attitude to health and safety. So their war machines, unlike your typical giant steampunk war machine, they work reliably. And what Saradomin would prefer, they build a huge fire throwers, cannons, that sort of thing. Every single one is a little bit different, but every single one works very reliably. And so they're positioned carefully behind the phalanx where nothing can get to them, so they can bombard the enemy positions with fire and rocks and whatever else they can think of. By comparison, the Zamorakians are using much more conventional archers. Again, mostly humans there. You might find a few Majora in there casting spells, but their job is to provide ranged fire support for the line infantry. This is not working. Every army needs skirmishers in front. If the two lines just confronted each other, then they need something to disrupt the enemy formation and try to get an advantage on the battlefield before the two lines clash. So the Saradominists are using humans, probably poorly armed humans who are using slings, which aren't a particularly effective weapon on the battlefield, but they don't really get any choice in what they do, because Saradomin tells them that that's what they're going to do. The Zamorakians, by comparison, at this point in the Third Age, they've been pushed back so far into Forintry, they've lost all the resources of the Empire, they're really starting to lose troops. So they've taken to using necromancy. So what they use as skirmishers is just a huge mass of undisciplined zombies, which they can then just push forward into the enemy line, hoping to consume as many of their resources as possible before the real forces arrive. The other thing that they've been doing with necromancy is that they've been using a higher and higher proportion of whites in their infantry forces. So Zamorak doesn't like using whites because they're not that independent thinkers, and they tend to lower morale of all of the soldiers around them. But as they've taken more and more casualties, he's had no choice, and so the proportion of whites has risen from 1 in 10 to 2 in 10, and so on. No, I'm really not doing this. Both forces are also supported by cavalry. Now, cavalry on the Saradominist side are exclusively centaurs. Early in the Second Age, when Saradomin was first conquering Gielinor, he split his forces in, not only were they racially segregated by unit, they were racially segregated by army. So he had centaur armies, he had human armies, he had Icene armies, he had dwarven armies, and they didn't mix together. As the Second Age progressed, he lost to Zaros. As the Third Age progressed and became a huge rumble, he adapted his tactics, he started to integrate the races in to form the type of army that you see here. But originally, the centaur armies were comprised primarily of mobile archers. They were devastating, circling, firing in the back, keeping their distance, destroying their opponents without any chance to reach them. And so archery became very highly important, honorable skill in the centaur culture. But once they became integrated in with the rest of the Saradomin forces, Icene are so much better at that role because they can fly, and many of them can cast spells, that actually centaur archery became far less important. But the one thing centaurs could still do that Icene weren't anywhere near as good at was being very, very heavy shock cavalry. So the pride of the Centaur forces now are the cataphractoi, who are extremely heavily armored centaurs covered from head to foot in plate armor, who just drive straight at the strongest part of the enemy line and try to break it. And that's now become the pride of centaur culture, these bulking strength. They're not even that good at archery anymore, and some of the centaurs are a bit disgusted by that. By comparison, on the Zamorakian side, we've got light and heavy cavalry, the Clibanaria and Auxilia. Auxilia are ranged archers, anything that can move mobilely and fire. Again, Zamorak doesn't care who you are, only what you can do. So he's interested in humans on hornless unicorns. He's interested in demons that can keep a fast running pace. He's interested in anything that can keep up. So the Auxilia are the light ones who fire. The Clibanaria are heavily armored, shock cavalry again, although nowhere near as heavy as the cataphractoi. They're more interested in circling the enemy formation, charging it in the rear. And then the final thing that sort of qualifies as cavalry for the Zamorakians are the Preventories, which are large groups of things like hellhounds, like virii, any sort of large uncontrolled beast. Those aren't really a unit. They can't fulfill the battlefield discipline that Zamorak requires, but they're very useful after the battle's over, when the enemy line has been broken and they're all fleeing for their lives. They'll unleash their hellhounds, and the hellhounds will run them down, kill as many of them as possible to stop them from escaping. Then the final type are the flying creatures. The Saradomans in particular have a lot of Icene. Now, there are three interesting types of Icene that will take place in a typical Saradominist army. The Psiloi are like the closest thing the Icene have to line infantry. They're lightly armored, flying skirmishers. They'll use spells or ranged weapons to harass their target from a distance, keep as high as possible, try to keep the sun behind them, devastate the enemy with no chance to respond, preferably. The other two types are an unusual Icene troop type because they're melee troops, and Icene aren't particularly effective in melee because they're not massively more capable than non-flying opponents, and they have to give up their advantage of flying to get there. But there are two quite different elite units of Icene knights here. The Heteroi are the Icene nobility who originally assisted Saradomin in his conquest of the Icene homeworld. So all of those who were initially loyal to Saradomin were elevated to knighthood and nobility, and some of those noble families are still around now, and many of them are hundreds or thousands of years old. They're some of the most experienced melee fighters on Gillenor. They're probably anywhere up to, only the Majorat probably are older, and most of the Majorat aren't experienced melee fighters. So these are some of the most expert melee fighters on the planet, but each and every one of them values their own life far more heavily than they value the outcome of the battle. So they're considered extremely unreliable forces because they will run at the first sign of trouble. So they're only ever committed where their impact will immediately win the engagement without any great risk to themselves. By comparison, the Optimatoi are a similar unit of Icene Knights who are nowhere near as old or politically powerful. And they're the descendants of the knights who initially accompanied Saradomin in his conquest of Gillenor. And they are, by comparison to the Heteroi, fanatically loyal, always committing straight to the heart of the battle and getting in there and taking horrendous casualties. And as such, they're constantly having to be replenished from the ranks of the Psiloi. The Zamorakians, by comparison, have again, anything that can fly can be in his flying units. They're called the Alarii. They don't have enough reliable ranged creatures. You get the occasional Majorat on some kind of flying creature, or some kind of vampire who can cast spells. But anything that can fly can be in Zamorak's flying units, and their job primarily is to cover against the enemy flyers. They're the only thing the Zamorakians have that can get up into the air to kill the Icene in close combat before they bombard the troops to death. I don't know who's going to win that battle, but based on how historically it turned out, it seems likely that it was Saradomin.
Okay, cool. So, we're having a quick mid-thing Q&A on the gods specifically, because I'm sure loads of people have specific questions about the gods. So we've got about 10 minutes now to any questions you have on the gods or the Third Age Army setups, and then we'll move on to the next section. So if you've got any questions, raise your hand, and one of our lovely assistants will bring you a microphone.
Is the thing on? Yep. Okay, regarding the redacted artifact Armadillo used, is that what broke Abernat?
No.
Okay then.
Not exactly.
Okay, so obviously at the moment you're working on you're working on a canon replay of Slithgate's Endgame where we can get Armadale's Feather. Do you see any potential uses for that in the future, or do you see it as just an item that will stay in the bank?
There are sort of Easter egg story things that it would theoretically be useful for. I know several people who are Armadillion supporters, hey guys, really want to have the feather for playing it through the nice wave with Armadil, but the feather isn't a symbol of that. The feather is a symbol of his hopelessness, loss, and feeling of failure at the time. It was a very nice piece of writing by Mod Osborne that I'm not particularly keen on changing, but the feather might have a use in future. But it will be a story minor thing.
You mentioned that Saradomin was in pursuit of a criminal when he discovered the crowning artifact. Who was that criminal, and are we getting any lore on Saradomin's role on Terragard?
So in terms of the identity of that criminal specifically, it hasn't been established, and honestly it's not terribly important. It was pretty much an underling thug who happened to encounter that particular item and happened to fall into this windfall as part of a larger treasure trove. So it just incidentally happened to fall into his hands, but within the larger story is not a particularly important character.
Surely it's going to turn out to be Slithgate.
Oh, well, obviously. Spoilers.
Hi. Okay, so the Staff of Armadale.
The Staff of Armadale, yeah.
Did Armadale find it on Abenel or on Gelanor?
Neither.
Okay, that makes it way more complicated.
Is Samarak and Kazar doing some type of family counselling now?
What was that?
Is Samarak and Kazar doing some type of family counselling?
Yes, Slithgate is their counsellor.
I would love to see that kind of setup. Like, who would be there to counsel both a god and his Majorat's son?
Lucien from GowerQuest, he'll do that.
Lucien from GowerQuest.
Just say, just chill, guys.
I mean, if you're going to go with actual canon, Marimbo is probably the best one. It's like, guys, get together, have a party, have some booze.
Let's write that quest.
We should write that quest, yeah, sure.
We can have GowerQuest Gothics, right? He can play the part of a play of how that goes. Yeah.
Hello. Obviously, Armadil would consider it, but any of the other gods consider giving up their divinity, their immortality, and return to who they were before?
I don't think any of the other gods are willing to make that step. Saradomin wouldn't want to.
Well, I mean, he's experienced mortality recently
Yeah.
during Slithgate's Endgame, and
He
he
did
found
like
it
it.
quite a harrowing experience.
And Zamorak experienced it both in Slithgate's Endgame and in Children of Mars, sort of. And yeah, I don't think any of them would want to. I think only Armadil is the one who misses that kind of humanity, I think. Well, not humanity.
An important part of the question. Oh, sorry.
Potentially, Gothics might have got there by the end of that.
Gothics,
by the end of while Gothic sleeps.
Yeah,
I think
but
he quite,
Gothics is dead.
quite happily have lost his godhood and just returned to whatever.
Yeah.
I think
he was gonna.
What makes Armadil stand out is he's the only one who doesn't necessarily think that he deserves it.
Nice, yeah.
And all the others are absolutely confident that they
Yes.
deserve it.
I'd say that probably primary motivation for Gothics in going to sleep so frequently was that he wanted to let go of that mantle of responsibility and just get away from it all.
Hi. I've got a bit of a two-parter about the Elder Artifacts.
Okay.
First off, why are they so small when they're being used by gods that are the size of entire continents? Why are they so tiny? They're basically human-sized.
I'd like to take this one because it's an easy one. It will adjust its size to the person who's wearing it. So yeah, it might have been originally worn on the head of an immense elder god at one stage. When Saradomin wears the crown, it changes size to fit his head. Simple as that.
All right, thank you. And then I'd like to ask, are we ever going to find out exactly how the elder gods use the artifacts to create the current revision? Like, are we ever going to see them use, for example, the Staff of Armadil in a cutscene from the past or something to build something?
I'm not sure we go so far as showing a cutscene of the Elder Gods building reality, because that's, I mean, that's quite a high graphics budget, but I'm not sure we can reach it. And it's one of those things of, it almost works better with the implication. It's one of those things that if you show it, it immediately loses its majesty. So I don't necessarily think we need to show it.
We couldn't possibly do justice graphically to the concept.
That's very true.
Yeah.
There's almost certainly nobody who would have been able to witness it anyway.
Yeah,
to be able to recount the story.
Although the way that they used them isn't necessarily the way that they're being used now. I mean, I used the example there of it being a crown on Elder God's head, but it's more likely it was a ring at that point, something that might have scaled differently to that.
Everyone knows the way you use the Staff of Armadale is to just ram it into people.
Yeah. I mean, we called the Elder Sword a sword, but it was most likely more like a knife on a tool belt used for slicing off elements of matter, that kind of thing. And some of it was put in quite an abstract use that was quite hard to represent to mere mortals like us, because of their sheer immensity.
Quite a lot of the names are relative to races who've seen them and might compare them to something else they've seen themselves. Yeah. The Staff of Armadale almost certainly wouldn't have been used as a staff by the Elder Gods.
Yeah.
All right, I have a question. We've seen Brassica Prime a couple of times, and he obviously has some sort of influence. Do the other gods want to get themselves involved with him, and what would be their opinion of him or it?
I wrote some dialogue with the other gods about Brassica Prime for Endgame. Most of them just dismiss him because they think he's silly. Only a couple of them have worked out that actually, if Brassica's not being just, if he's not just ridiculous, if he's not just silly, then he's actually quite skilled. He's got quite a lot of information. If you think about it, he claims all vegetables, all plants are his minions, and there are plants everywhere in RuneScape. They're in all of the king's halls, all of the gods have nearby. If knowledge is power, like you should fear Brassica.
I think the slightly more meta answer is that a serious quest about Brassica Prime that seriously examines his motivations and his interactions with the rest of the world would be missing the point of Brassica Prime.
I think so. I don't think we would ever really take Brassica Prime properly seriously.
He's in a slightly hazy place in canon, where like he definitely exists, but we're probably not going to do serious Brassica Prime storytelling.
Brassica is he's like Marimbo. The only stories you'd really tell would be kind of light-hearted, comical things. I don't think it's right for us to do a deep, gritty, dark story about Brassica Prime, as funny as that could be.
For such a joke character, I think a quest about him would be incredibly boring.
Brassica has an edge, though. I mean, unlike pretty much all the other gods who were ejected from Gillenor from Lydia, he stuck around. He had a chance to have his leaves to the ground, as it were, and listen in and take on all this information of what's going on around him, much better informed than all these guys were exiled.
Yeah. He got past the edicts somehow. His Gothic slightly went,
he
knows something.
I think it's because the edicts were made using the life runes. And Brassica Prime is the god of life runes.
This is not canon.
It's Brassica Prime, who knows?
Okay, so I don't remember hearing Obi-Sooth being referred to as a he or a she, so which one is it?
Obi-Sooth is male.
Obi-Sooth is male. Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Hey, as the player character, can we trust Zaros?
Can you
trust him?
Trust
to have
Zaros?
the player character's interests at heart.
I mean, that's a question for you as the player character. Do you trust Zaros? Has he always been there for you, always been on your side, or is he playing you like a puppet? Only you can answer that. Well, I mean, we could, but it's not as fun.
You can certainly trust Zaros to be the god of absolute control who wants to control everything. I mean, he's got that one.
But, you know, he might buy you a beer in a bar.
Yeah. No, he sent out an address to do that.
That is great.
Cool. If we don't have any more questions, I'll move us on. Oh, one more.
Okay, I don't know if this would be completely god-based, but what's happened with the godless since Tuska? Have they just gone and had one big massive party after Virago's?
Oh, what's happened with the godless? They're off kind of doing their own thing. Does anyone got any ideas of what the godless are up to at the moment? They have all put shirts on. And they feel horrific about it.
What I said, they're hiding in the general population. They've all put shirts on.
Yeah. Yes, They are doing stuff in the background. We do have plans for them, but we've not had a chance to bring those plans to fruition with any kind of godless quest yet.
I think
so it's the sort of thing we'd say for later.
The godless exists primarily to resist the gods.
That's true.
So if the gods aren't doing something bad at the moment, then the godless are like, oh, everything seems to be fine.
Exactly.
They're all busy with Sliske right now, so let's just get on with our lives.
Yeah, so they might, now that Sliske is dealt with, they might crop up again.
Particularly with how damaging World Events 1 and 2 were, they were quite happy to just go, no, let's put a stop to this. And now nothing's really happening, so they don't have much to do.
Okay, cool, right. So we're now going to move straight back in, and I'm going to hand it over to Mod Stu for his section on RuneScape cosmology.
So, the cosmology of RuneScape, the multiverse. The universe of RuneScape, as we know, was created by the Elder Gods, of which, in this vision, there are 4. So, looking at a broader scale, here's an approximation, a diagram, it's not to scale, of the planar gallery. Think of it as an art gallery where each of the portraits in that gallery is a plane, a finite space which can contain one or more planets, star systems, constellations. The space between those planes is known as the abyss, because as we know, in order to teleport, you teleport through the abyss, even when teleporting within a plane itself. So you'll teleport into the abyss, slide around it very, very fast, and pop back again into that plane. Then outside of the abyss, we have the void, endless emptiness, which inexplicably also contains void pests. Then between the abyss and the void, we have the periphery, a membrane separating the two. It is the periphery that Guthix pierced with the Elder Sword and caused void pests to be able to enter our reality. Now, I must confess, it's a very, very small font on this. I can't quite read it. After that, then we have the incorporeal planes. So in addition to those planes that are more material and tangible, we also have planes such as the Shadow Realm, which is sort of like a spine running through most of the planes, not necessarily all of them, as a coterminous plane that occupies roughly the same space, but it's like a shadow version, a mirror version of that could have various changes to it. In a similar sort of way that you have the spirit realm in the wilderness, which is similar, but it's a more ghostly version. Some things are opposite. And then also multiple planes can have afterlives attached to them, whichever living being that has some sense of self-awareness was the first one that died on a world is the one who becomes the death of that world, and ferries other people who die into the afterlife of that plane. So after looking at the broader sense of planes, now we can start drilling down into the details. So we start with the lower planes. Right at the very bottom, we have Frinisque. This is the Gillinor of the previous revision. So this is where the Elder Gods, after they've achieved their perfect world, the one that's the most delicious, lush with anima, this is where they laid their eggs, consuming the anima of that world in order to give life to the next generation of themselves. And there are several other worlds nearby in the lower planes, which are husks of dead worlds. But there seem to be some traces of magic from the previous revision on these worlds, and that's where we get ancient magic. So smoke, blood, ice, and to some extent shadow. Shadow seems to be something that is occurring from one reality to the next, the previous revision. So there are traces there, and if you are familiar with the lore journals from Nick's Angel of Death, it also goes into detail about how Xeros acquired that power of smoke, blood, and ice from those planets, Infernus, Vampirium, and Leng. Then advancing up through the planes, we have planes aligned to the elements. Now, the Elder Gods in their infancy were more akin to elemental titans, if you can compare that to like Greek mythology. So each of them embodied a certain element. Now, normally the elements of earth, water, air, and fire you might consider to be in careful balance. But it turns out that with the Elder Gods, there seems to be a power structure to them. As we see with the eggs of the Elder Gods in the Elder Halls of Frinisque, there is a pattern on each of their eggs that indicates their power level. So Jas is the strongest due to having a hexagonal six-sided shape. Vic is the weakest, having a triangle. Now, the goal of the Elder Gods is to create a world that provides a vast amount of anima, that is a perfect creation, so that it can feed the next generation, and then they can perpetuate themselves as a species by consuming all the life in that reality in a continuous cycle. And in the process of doing that, they not only need to perfect their skills in creating these worlds, but also improve themselves. It's a way they can evolve their talents, their physicality, their mentality, even their spirituality, becoming higher beings capable of creating more complex worlds. So initially, they took elements of what they could understand, those core elements of earth, water, air, and fire. You can't do very much with those, but you can iterate on them to some extent. And they managed to, in collaborating, come up with the combination worlds. And these created the framework that could be used to create more advanced worlds, creating things like the atmosphere, the molten core, those components that are necessary to try and sustain life. Could compare it to, on our periodic table, the runes themselves become ever more complex. So you start with like hydrogen and helium. As they iterate on these, they create more complex worlds, more complex elements. Then you start getting carbon, and you can have carbon-based life. And as we know, carbon-based life is delicious. So they have the combination runes. And we have a couple of examples of combination worlds here, such as Muspel, where the Muspel come from. As a lava world, Abner as a smoke world, which is quite an interesting one. You might think it might be dust, a combination of air and earth, but smoke, some association with ancient magic that could be very interesting in the future. And Ubiusk as a mud world. Now we advance up into the catalytic planes, and you've got a rather interesting image there in the middle, associating the Elder God's physicality with the chakra. Now, if you're not familiar with chakras, the general idea is that there are parts of the body that are energy centers, and they flow up the body from your most core physicality of Earth that's about survival and fear and day-to-day living and your physical needs, progressing up to so that's the root chakra, moving on to the sacral chakra, which is associated with water, and it's your pleasure and your guilt about that pleasure, and it's also associated with water and the flow of life. And so you're progressing up through these different elements of the body, trying to achieve something of a higher spirituality, a consciousness of thought. There's a similar sort of alignment to the runes of RuneScape. So the runic magic becomes ever more complex and dealing with elements that are associated with certain worlds. So we see, for example, that they created body worlds, of which we have a nice little spoiler for Stalker content in the future, the Stalker homeworld of Ocularis. We know that Terragard is associated with Lore quite heavily, so that's another one. And we've got a little more information about that later on when we come to the Icene, but also Hello is associated with the astral plane. And so we're progressing all the way up through these, through more advanced runes. Then Vic started working with the forces of nature and created things that involve a lot of plant life, more verdant. He managed to create the fairies, for example. If you read the Memorial to Guthix, there's some interesting background stories to the fairies and their origins that also align to this. And so they're collaborating and trying to create ever more complex worlds. And it seems like there was a certain revelation, particularly for Jas, in finding a means of transcendence, of focusing less on the material and more on the ethereal. And in collaboration with the others, managing to achieve transcendent worlds that are associated with astral, cosmic, and finally soul runes. Soul being the ultimate thing, soul being about anima, being delicious. Which brings us to the balance plane, the ultimate culmination of all these different runic magics. Gillenor, the perfect world, a harmonious balance of these elements. It's also where the Stone of Jas was used to create blank essence, and essentially this is where you have the access points to all these other realities of runic magic through the rune altars. They are like conduits that draw energy of that particular alignment of rune into this world where they can be combined to create different kinds of magic. Now, the way that we align these runes through human magic is more of a kind of hermetic wizardry, where it's quite mentally focused. That's why runes like mind runes and air runes are lower on this order than might be perceived by the elder gods, because it being a mentally focused structure of wizardry, that's what they can perceive, that's what they can grasp more easily. And then as you progress through your rune crafting, as it were, then you can access more complex runes, but in a slightly different order. So on Galanor, we have the rune altars, we have the rune span, and we also have the spirit plane.
So RuneScape the movie and why it never happened. I'm going to preface this by this was Mod Osborne's section, but he sadly couldn't make it. So I apologize in advance for his jokes. So, we were approached a couple of times regarding a RuneScape movie. Some actual quite big-named companies came to Jagex and said, hey, we've seen your game, it sounds amazing, we want to make a film. And we went, oh, let's talk. We even got so far as to ask players who they would vote for or who they would want to see play the wise old man in RuneScape the movie, although I think this slide has been deleted, thankfully. It has. So there was a slide regarding Hulk Hogan and Sean Connery, where as the two top choices, and Dave's hilarious humor was to swap them round, and of course none of us would know this. So when we were looking at the sort of style of film, we looked at the films that were sort of current at the time. And they were films like Thor. So Thor's a big action movie, it's impressive, there's lots of shiny graphics, but it has sort of comedy at its core as well. And we were looking at that going, Thor is amazing, Thor already works. But we spoke to Mod Mark, and Mod Mark went, not really, and pitched us more towards something like The Princess Bride, to more like Stardust. So that comedy and that sort of whimsy is much more at its core, and much more the sort of focus of it, which is what we were in talks about going forward. So we thought, which storylines are we going to do? Like, which storylines, given the wealth of quests, the wealth of things in RuneScape, what storylines could we possibly do? And of course, the most immediately obvious one was Ritual of the Majorat. This whole thing with these ancient beings, shapeshifters, magic, a villain that was just obvious and evil and a great sort of screen presence. And we were looking at that and going, well, we could do Ritual of the Majorat, but bring in more characters, bring in a wider range of things. So we're looking at it, and not just the people involved in the quest, but bringing in Zanuck, bringing in the wise old man directly, all these big named characters that weren't originally in it, but would have worked as part of the storyline to really move it forward. But, unfortunately, the kind of market in video game movies sort of dropped out. I don't know if any of you noticed, but after, what was it? After kind of Resident Evil, you can blame them, it's not our fault, it's theirs. The market in sort of video game movies kind of vanished, and a lot of the sort of talks sort of ebbed away. Except relatively recently, we started talking with a Chinese movie company. A movie company who is best known for making horror movies, not horror, horror movies, but sort of monster-style horror movies. And we were talking to them about what we could do, they were really interested in RuneScape. And the quest that really sort of tickled them, bizarrely, is the Cave Goblin series. And the idea behind this was that you would be watching from the Cave Goblin point of view. The quest would follow Zanuck as the protagonist, starting off in this Cave Goblin world, and then slowly rising to the surface of this world and encountering these strange, quite frightening creatures. That's right, we would be the monsters. Humans would be the monsters. Yeah. I'm not sure what's happening with that one. I think that one's gone quiet as well, but you never know. Yeah, that's all I have on that. Unfortunately, Dave isn't here, so I don't have all the extra bits. But moving on, we're now going to talk about the races of RuneScape. So these are all the little lesser explored species, and I will immediately start by handing it back to Stu again.
So, the Icene. The Icene are a race of long-lived beings that Sarah Derman brought to Gielinor during the Second Age. The Icene founded Hallowvale in Gielinor, which we now know as Mauritania. Hallow is the name of the Icene homeworld. It is a beautiful world, and most of its surface is covered in ocean. Along its equator, there is a flotilla of isolated tropical islands and plainslets. The Icene refer to these occupied islands as the Hallowed Isles. The water of Hallow is a vibrant blue, but it is highly acidic. The sea bears very little life, and sailing, swimming, and fishing simply aren't practical. A single rotation of the planet Hallow takes an entire year, and the night is directly hazardous. The Icene prefer constant light and perpetual summer. Here they can grow verdant crops on the sun-facing islands. The winged Icene therefore are migratory. As their settlements fall to the creeping darkness of a year-long night, flocks of Icene abandon their homes and fly across the oceans to settle once more in structures that have lain empty for an entire winter. The Icene are also known to clip the wings of their wrongdoers as punishment. This strands the shunned Icene in the darkness to survive the winter alone. In Icenic culture, this is not considered barbaric, but a long-honored tradition. When Sarah Derman settled on Hallow, he constructed an artificial island that automatically follows the sun. This was his gift to the Icene, a more comfortable home for them. This floating fortress, the capital city of Hallow, is called New Domina. It is named in memory of the settlement where Sarah Derman was born. Icene have an extremely long lifespan, but a very low birth rate. Their military contribution to the God Wars has greatly diminished their numbers, and the vast majority of the remaining Icene now congregate in the city of New Domina. When Guthics banished the gods to Gielinor at the end of the Third Age, Sarah Derman returned to New Domina to help the Icene recover from their losses during the God Wars.
Okay, so now I'm going to go on to a race that has a close place in my heart, what little of my heart there is, which is the Iluyanka, aka the Dragon Riders. So, the Iluyanka are native to the planet of Aya. Aya is a colourful world of cold-blooded creatures. There is no mammalian life on Aya. The plane is surrounded by dust and debris, which is why they can't see the stars. They do have a sun. Some people were confused about this. I wanted to clarify. It's not a frozen world. They have a sun. It's all fine. And the Iluyanka themselves, they work with the creatures on their world. They have a very kind of symbiotic relationship. This is most notable in the Gurs that they have, but they also have various other races that they work with. They help tend. And they're an agrarian people. But most importantly, I think, is the fact that the Iluyanka are a dying people. There used to be many tribes, but now only a single village stands. Their entire civilization and culture is just disappearing away, fading away into nothingness. This is kind of partially enforced by what they call the Olandai. So the Olandai is the religion of the Iluyanka. It's a religion in a kind of very vague sense. It's more a collection of sort of superstitions. It's very, very fatalistic. Every Iluyankan, everyone on Aya who follows the Olandai believes that there is a place and a purpose for them in the world. The world is greater than the individual. Everything else, the whole, the collection, is more important than just them. And more importantly, suffering is part of this design. Like, if you are suffering, that is not inherently a bad thing. That means that you are working through the Olandai. You must work through your suffering. You must continue through it, because that is your place. This is important because, as part of the Olandai, the Iluyanka, unlike a lot of other races, do not consider themselves to be the most important species on the planet. Like other races, most sentient races go, I'm sentient, therefore I am the best, I'm the most important. But the Illuyanka don't think like this. The Illuyanka think they have a place, they have a purpose, and the other races, the other species on the planet do as well. So they accept they're a dying species, and they're working to preserve the world for the other creatures, the other species, for the Gurs and the various other things that live on the world. Superstition is incredibly important to the Illuyanka. They have lots of really weird superstitions, and all of these come from this belief, this Olandai, because they observe things and go, well, this is how life must be, this is how I must work, because I've seen it happen, therefore. So we have things like, don't sleep against the red-leaved trees, which is a ridiculous superstition. The trees aren't poisonous and things like that. But one Illuyankan once had something bad happen to them when they did this. Therefore, the Olandai has said that you must never sleep against these trees. And you must only drink tea from your left hand, never your right hand, because someone once did this and burnt their mouth, or something like this. The Olandai has told them, this is how the world works, you must conform, must do it this way. And so they have lots of really strange, really silly superstitions, which have affected a huge part of their culture. So, life on Aya now. Like, we've established they're a dying race, so it's a very sort of somber existence. They have had only one new child in a decade. Only one, which is horrific if you think about it. So they know that they are dying. They've seen it, they've seen their numbers dwindling, and they've kind of accepted this. And because of the Olandai, they're not trying to save themselves. If any of you played One of a Kind, you'll remember at the end, like, Sharingan tries to talk Hanabus out of this thing of helping, because he has his place, he has his Olandai, he has to come back with his people and die. Like, that's what the Illuyanka are doing. They're dying, so he should be part of that. So what they're doing is they're creating monuments to themselves. They're creating things for the other races to see, for other people to come and see, to remember who the Illuyanka were. It's a very peaceful world, it's a very peaceful setup, because they've now kind of embraced death. They've embraced that they're fading away, and they've become almost Zen-like in their sort of spirituality. They've accepted it, and that is very calming for them. It's a very relaxed place to be if you're happy dying. So that's the Illuyanka. I want to pass you on to Phil to talk about oogs and rogues and fairs.
So, sad thing happened recently. God of War Bandos happened to die. But before that, we had some other creatures beneath him, which also happened to die, barring the orgs, of which there are a few left. So, of course, we know that Bandos was big on genetic engineering. He needs these armies, he needs all these dudes to follow him and do his bidding. So goblins, ogres, orcs, trolls, hobgoblins, I could keep going on. We know about these guys. These guys were just churned out and bred and bred and bred. These guys are numerous, huge in power altogether. And most importantly, they're blindly obedient. They'll do exactly what you tell them to do. Go off and die in battle, go attack all those guys. You're probably all going to die, but do it anyway. Fine, whatever, cool. So what's missing? We have the Faigs and Raugs. We have examples of these beings existing, because we have their bones in the Ogre burial grounds. But importantly, before that, we have the Orgs. A couple of examples we've seen. General Grada, he's huge, he's massive, he's powerful. He is one of the legendary guardians and generals of the God Wars dungeon under the Bandos faction. And again, we've got Zarador. This was Bandos' right-hand man in The Bird and the Beast, and the effective de facto leader after Bandos died in the Mighty Fall. So unlike many of the other Bandosian races that I've just previously described, these guys are huge, powerful, bulky. They're built to last. They're not going to die immediately. But as a result, it takes a lot of resources to make these guys and breed them out and make sure they're trained up adequately. So they're actually quite small in number, and as a result, they've kind of diminished and diminished as time's gone on. These guys are great as leaders and battle commanders. Bandos, importantly, despite being a god and a god of war, can't be at all places at all times. So these guys are leading huge battles, great big fronts, all over the place. Moving on, we have Raugs. So who might these guys be? These guys are support roles. So these are your scouts, these are your preemptive assassins, and your messengers. Not everybody has to run into battle and die, or be an immediate leader. These guys would check out a battle beforehand, see if you can do anything to kind of make it easier to begin with. You could be going out. Oh, there's one of their leaders who just happens to be lying in their tent asleep. Kill him. Cool, nice. Now their entire battle squadron is completely muted. Can we just run in and run them over? Again, message delivery. Something bad could be really happening, and the orc who's commanding this battle has no idea. These guys come in, tell him, he reconstructs his plan. Cool, we're all golden again. What are these guys going to look like, though? They're lanky, thin, they're built for speed, they can camouflage well, hide in the grass, just lay down super flat, or up against a tree, he's looking around. These guys have a hunched posture, they're kind of almost quadrupeds, so they'd be running along on 4 legs just to be so fast, get in there, get out, do their job. Moving on, we have Thags. So these guys are kind of like lieutenants, mini commanders beneath the orcs. They're kind of micromanaging the battle. The orcs are making the big decisions, the big plans, but these guys kind of have, all right, this section of the battle, I need to do this, something with this, so on and so on. If there's a crisis, something terrible happens just out of nowhere. I don't know, maybe there's an earthquake that's just gone off and half your troops have just fallen down a well. They're there to sort that out, and they don't have to bother the orcs necessarily. Again, what are these guys going to look like? These guys need to be quick so they can get around and sort things out, but they also don't want to be killed because they're kind of almost important to the battle. These aren't your goblins that you just send in and throw them down. So they've got quite big bony plating, so if they come under attack, they can kind of shield themselves and get out of there, and other guys can come in and take out whoever's trying to take them down. They've got this huge gaping maw as well, so they can just shout orders across the entire battlefield. It might be like a mile-long battlefield, and the guy in the end, he can still hear his orders, which is great, because that's exactly what they need to do, because they need to tell them how to behave and what to do in battle. These guys are fairly big as well, so if you imagine an orc and an orc, somewhere in between that, maybe he's like 7, 8 foot. So now we're going to move on to where are they now? Catch up with where everyone's at after Sliske's endgame. That's for you.
Oh yeah. The Margerats, everyone's favourite, well my favourite, I hope they're your favourite. Last seen in their favourite formation, standing in a semicircle around a landmark. Azanadra, Zaros' biggest fan, he'll follow him until he loves him. Azanadra, with the obvious exception of Zamorak, now obviously the most powerful of the Margerat, but with the recent influx of power they got at the end of Children of Mar, now starts to feel himself approaching godhood, and really isn't comfortable with that because that's blasphemy. Azanadra is not a god, Azanadra is a priest, and he's really not sure what he makes of that. He's very much losing touch with his mortality. He's becoming distant. He's not the friendly, happy chap he was before, and he's not entirely happy about that either. But he's trying to put that aside, and he's off in the abyss looking for ancient evil to face. Khazad, General Khazad, general in name only really, with the recent revelation of the identity of his father, now has a new mentor and role model, someone with thousands of years of military experience who can perhaps teach him to be the leader that he aspires to be. Karshai, despite the recent events, is still uninterested in the conflict between the gods, and he's given up on Gielinor. What's happening here isn't going to help him, and so he's returned to the lower planes. He's started trying to piece things together, figure out what the point of everything is, and he's very much following in the footsteps of Zaros, almost coincidentally, who himself left RuneScape, went out into the universe and tried to figure things out. Inakra, she's obviously still heavily devoted to Zamorak, but she's now thinking of things in a slightly different way. She thinks it would be really cool to have wings. And of course, Acthanakos, who finds himself standing in the desert, wondering where it all went wrong. He remembers being a leader, he remembers being respected, he remembers even being worshipped, and he's wondering, could that happen again? Who could I find that could do that for me? Bilrak, as far as Bilrak's concerned, the God Wars never ended. I mean, there was a very long pause in the middle there, but he was diligently working, trying to get Zamorak back, and now Zamorak's back. Now he has another resource. He has portals to alien worlds full of monsters that can serve as a useful army for Zamorak. So he's got plenty to do. We should tell. Haziel turns out he's from a different race completely. Well, sort of. I mean, a different sub-race of children of Ma. What does that mean? Why does he have horns? He's really not sure. And of course, the last one is worth talking about is Zamorak himself. I mean, we've talked about Zamorak as a god, but what about Zamorak as a Majora? I mean, what he discovered in Children of Ma was that these are his people. These are all that are left of his people, and he still cares deeply for them. Even the ones that are so disloyal to him that they will fight against him, he still cares about. So that's what he's going to be moving on with now.
Okay. So now on to the other big players following the Majrat is, of course, the Dragonkin. That's worthy of applause, Grant. Excellent. So, the Stone of Jazz, spoilers, has exploded. It is gone. The thing tethering the Dragonkin to all the pain and suffering has gone boom. But what does this mean? It means it got us down. Is the curse broken? That's a question that everyone should be asking. Are the Dragonkin now free? Or are they still connected to it even though it's in pieces? Has it had a particular effect on Kerapak? I mean, Kerapak is one who channeled all this energy. All of that stuff went through him. He was connected, like, absolutely to the Stone of Jazz, to the tether connecting all of the Dragonkin. He was the focus for that. What impact has that had on him? Because it almost certainly has. An important thing to note about the Dragonkin is that they're not gone. This is not the end of their story. They have not resolved this and walked away going, oh, we did this one thing, goodbye. They're still about. Kerapak continues his experiments. He is a scientist at his core, and he continues to experiment in dubiously ethical ways. But he has a new focus. It's no longer about the stone, it's about something else. What could that thing be? We're too mean to tell you. The Dactyl are now swarming to Kerapak. He has achieved the unthinkable, the impossible. They always sort of followed him before, but now they have seen, like, he has achieved this miracle, and they're all kind of swarming to him going, mighty Kerapak. And the Necrocertes are still about, and they have an entirely new plan. So, there are important things to note about the Dragonkin. Firstly, they're still dying out. They are still unable to reproduce. So even with all the other problems, they still can't reproduce. They still have huge problems. And with that, with those things in mind, remember that the Dragonkin were dangerous when tied to the stone. They were really quite dangerous. They took out some big players. Now they're not tied to the stone. How much more dangerous are they now? How much greater a threat have they become? Yeah, they become. Not I become. That's weird. I'm a Dragonkin. Sorry, guys. So the Dragonkin story is far from over. Oh, how did that slide get there? So, now we open up the floor to you guys. Until they kick us out, we're willing to answer any lore-based questions on any subject. We'll try and do what we can to answer it. Just raise your hands and one of our lovely assistants will grab you. Hopefully, if he's not hiding, we might even have some questions from YouTube. I don't know where he is.
Hi, so how does Dimension of Disaster fit into the cosmology?
Wow, that's complicated. Okay, so basically you would have, so if you go back to that larger planar map at the beginning, you'd have alternate versions of that planar map into potentially infinite versions of that reality. Realities where maybe Mars survived and there are a greater number of them, or maybe there's only one. There could be only one elder god that consumed the power of all the others. All sorts of iterations could occur, and that would in turn affect the planar cosmology of that multiverse.
Oh yeah. What sort of culture shock would Vindicta have meeting the remnants of her race and her father?
she'd have a horrific culture shock. I mean, you look at Vindicta, she's full of rage, hence her name, and hatred, and she's a warrior at her core. She slaughters things. And she'd go to Aya and she'd go, they are all sitting around going, well, isn't it lovely that we're dying? Isn't it lovely? Tea, lovely? Only from her left hand. She would be absolutely shocked. She'd have, I think it would be lovely to see. Would she accept this? Would she go amongst the people and go, oh, this is who I am, I'm home. I can live behind this armor and this big scary dragon that tries to murder people. Or does she go, you guys, you look at you, I can see what you all are like. I know what you can do, I do it. Here, wear this armor, stab things, join me. It's an interesting question.
Hello, I'm just curious about the inspiration behind the Elder Gods. So you've got, for instance, Jazz as the matron, Wen as the corpse. That's going to be an extension of the triple goddess, Maiden, Mother, Crone?
That's a potential interpretation, yeah. I mean, they were all born at the same time, so they wouldn't necessarily have aged physically differently. But they certainly would have taken on different roles in the process of creating different planets. That isn't something we're necessarily endeavoring to channel, but it's certainly an interesting concept, and maybe it occurs in an entirely different multiverse.
It's relatively important, the point you raised about them each being on a different power level, and this is a result of previous revisions and how they've evolved over the course of their species progression, I guess. And again, just they're experimenting. Their entire life is effectively a great big sandbox puzzle, trying to work out how best to make the best world to, again, reproduce and advance their species. So.
But there's a new desperation to this particular revision in that Jess has had to destroy her own egg. She no longer has any means of perpetuating herself into the next revision. This is her last chance to create the best world they possibly can and maintain the rest of them. So the stakes are certainly higher. And of course, they've lost all of their number.
Hi, you said that the Muspa are, well, we know that the Muspa are the creations from Mars nightmares, but you said that the Muspa come from Muspel.
Yes, I do apologize. I meant Orspa. I keep getting those two mixed up.
Beautifully named planet.
Yeah. Yeah. Orspa come from Muspel.
From Muspel.
Muspel, yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like Muspel when you say it in certain accents.
Yeah.
You mentioned the blood planes in the lower planes,
and
as well in the higher planes again. So does this mean this is a reiteration, and where are smoke and fume in this kind of world then?
Yeah, there's a very interesting overlap there. So it seems like although there is a greater kind of magic that was discovered through the ancient magic of previous revisions, there are also runes that aren't necessarily used in that magic through smoke runes and fire runes. So what's very likely happened in that situation was that they probably reverse engineered that ancient magic to some extent, went back to those lower planes and tried to work out how they worked and harnessed some of that latent power as a way of creating worlds more built around blood and life and the coursing of energy. So there are, I mean, that's planar cosmology. We only see a few examples of those worlds. There are some worlds within of a particular runic element we've not even heard of yet that are still to be discovered, or indeed that might have been completely taken apart and are now just detritus floating in the abyss.
I have two questions, if I may. One, you showed on the cosmology that you have the various planes, the periphery and the void. Why are there revisions in the first place then, if the Elder Gods could theoretically just move out into the void?
Well, the void is places where essentially they haven't created worlds. So if you think of each of those planes as like a canvas upon which they have practiced creating worlds, that's their art form. And they created one piece of art after another up to a certain finite space, and that's how far the abyss extends within that multiverse. So the void is where everything they didn't touch. It's just the emptiness, the potential space where planes could have been created.
The void is also incredibly empty, whereas through a revision, there's a lot of recycling, so they'll be deconstructing old worlds, throwing away bits they don't need, and then using useful bits to create new planets.
Okay, and my second question is the hinted at sixth elder god that Zaros referred to as this incorporeal, not quite there in the same sense as the other elder gods. Is there anything from that?
Do you want to take that?
I think we can't really say anything.
Yeah, I don't think we can really say anything about that. I mean, the hints weren't accidental. That's about as much as we can say. Sorry.
We have a plan at the very least.
We do have a plan.
We do have a plan.
I was thinking, in the first revision, how many elder gods were there? I mean, we know that some have been lost since then, but how many were there originally?
That's another, we wouldn't want to answer that question because...
Like, how far back could you go? Yeah. Like, that's a very chicken and egg question as well.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily even know there is such a thing as a first revision.
No, it's that kind of...
What if it goes back infinitely?
We've talked about what the notion of the sort of elder gods things really mean. We've tried... So a lot of it isn't largely relevant to how the game works, let's be honest. It's that sort of knowledge that goes really far back and is never ever going to be a thing that impresses the game. We've discussed it, we've had arguments at length about what it means, what these things can mean, so we have certain ideas, but there's nothing I think we'd be comfortable stating as canon right now.
I think we would struggle to even delve into the last revision, never mind anything before that.
Yeah. It's that kind of... It's interesting, but it's not important for how the game and the story thing works fundamentally at this level.
But it was, we could talk a lot about ancient history, but then the things that we then made up and revealed would then spoil the ongoing story of the Elder Gods. So we can't just sort of say everything.
But the sheer enormity of the Elder Gods and the vast amount of energy they need in order to sustain themselves as such an advanced race implies there probably weren't that many of them initially. We're probably not talking vast millions of them, giant armies of them, because well, the world simply couldn't, the universe simply couldn't sustain that. There wouldn't be enough energy to maintain them.
What would have happened if we never defeated Tusker? And can we go to a dimensional disaster SD where we didn't defeat Tusker?
That sounds like an alternate dimension where a lot of road trips happen, I think. I think that's a perfect place to get the road trip quest in. Yeah, road trip.
Conceptually speaking, it's possible. It's a matter of assigning resource to it, I guess.
So I don't think any of us were directly involved with Tusker that well done. I know that, so there was a plan, and I believe it basically obliterated huge chunks of Gillinor.
Yes.
So obviously we wouldn't have just turned the game off. So Tusker wouldn't have gone, hum, and they would have gone, bye guys, and gone home. That would have been an extremely bad plan. But we would have changed some of how the game surface would have been. So there would have been damage to major cities. There would have been probably new quest lines of death, destruction. Oh, isn't life miserable? To staple my hand to my forehead. That kind of thing. But we wouldn't have just obliterated everything. We wouldn't have removed 90% of the content of the game. We'd have tweaked around things, so the game would have been would operate. You could do all the quests you could do. We wouldn't remove large chunks of content. We would fundamentally have changed the sort of the visual face of RuneScape.
It certainly wouldn't have been like an instantaneous change either. Mazcab is the prime example that you can physically see, where Tusker's come down, not done her business. That's the opposite. Consumed huge amounts of anima, and the planet has had to try and recover of its own accord, and through things like they're not anima guardians, they are anima guardians, and the gobies, and so on and so on. So this would have been like a gradual decay, and so on and so on. And I'm sure the races of Gillinor would have fought back against Tusker, even if she did land.
Well, it might have, because we discussed vague things that we could have done, like it might have woken the Elder Gods up earlier, because they'd have got up and gone, excusez-moi, slap. And we'd have had to have...
Tosca wasn't expecting that.
She wasn't. She wouldn't have, no. And it would have advanced the story in a very different way.
One thing would be if we're comparing sort of the effect that Tosca would have had on our game world versus a potential alternate universe, which I think we probably wouldn't do that quest, but if we did, we could be much more apocalyptic.
Oh, yeah.
Because we don't have to worry about how much damage was done to the integrity of the game world.
We could just obliterate everything.
Yeah, we'll
like
just
dark skies,
we can just wipe out
fire.
Camelot with no trouble. We just get rid of it. Yeah, I like that alternate universe.
Tusk would probably stick around though. So he moved on from Mascab to go find something nicer. When you've got the perfect world full of the best ammo that's there to sustain an Elder God, you're probably going to stick around.
I've got the film for that Chinese monster company. It's Tusker versus Lornab.
No.
Tusker versus Mecha Lornab.
Mecha Lornab. Why do we have you on the Lore Council again?
I was going to say Space Tusker, but that's
This is gold. This is solid gold.
Yeah.
Next question, please.
Hi. How many orcs are left after Fairy Tale Part 3 and the Mighty Fall?
So orcs are also probably pretty small in number now. There is an influx as a result of the unfreezing of the God Wars dungeon. There's a huge army there beneath Grada in terms of that. But beyond that, they're sort of disparate tribes really, all over the place. In the same way that orcs would have been sort of hiding away and looking for a greater leader, I guess. That's not to say that there's not loads more off-world, say.
There's probably more on UBS.
Yes, particularly after Mightfall.
Yeah. A lot of them would have gone from Gillinor to UBS.
For sure.
To follow whoever the new leader was.
Whether they'll survive there on that dying planet is another avenue to explore, really.
I mean, orcs are a race we don't really make much use of, and if we needed to, I think we could produce a source of them.
Absolutely. And we've said that orcs are readily available within Banus' breeding program, so it wouldn't be a problem to sort of bring them back up in numbers, I don't think. Whereas orcs are pretty much doomed to extinction.
Hi. Returning to the Elder Gods for a moment, have the Elder Gods elected to require rejuvenation and to lay eggs and, in a sense, be reborn?
That's a good, have they chosen to?
I mean, that's a very deep question about their identity.
Yeah.
As I imagine them, no, definitely not.
No, it's more instinctual. It's part of their nature. Yeah. But there's nothing saying. So this goes back to that kind of previous revision thing, which is everything they've done is incorporated. It's changed. They've evolved. They've improved. It could have been that in one of the earlier revisions that maybe they went, maybe if we lay eggs and do this, it could work. So that's what one of the sort of going back thing is. But,
it might have become their nature.
Yeah.
It might have even been a survival strategy maybe at that time. This was the only way we could protect our species.
But,
and as we see with like the Tsar, when they return back to a form of reproduction outside of the Elder Kiln, they start laying eggs. That seems to be genetically something that's structurally passed down through the kiln as inheriting some of the elements of Fall's nature. That they also acquired that ability to reproduce through eggs. There was an innate aspect of themselves that could be reawoken when they had no other means of perpetuating themselves.
as it stands, the current versions are more instinctual. They follow a very specific pattern of how they work, which is partially what makes them kind of frightening.
They certainly don't think on the same kind of wavelength that you and I would, or any other sort of sentient race within the RuneScape universe. They're, yeah.
I know it's been asked to death, but every year it needs to be asked again. Are we going to either get any news about Abena, or are we going to get some, you know, first-hand accounts about how life is there, like get more evidences in game?
So this is the when's rite of passage happening question. Sorry, it is the bane of my life. I mean,
you've just delayed it by another 2 years.
You have. Thank you. It's now not due until 2074. I believe the Twitter account said that. No, it's so with unfinished business, rite of passage is on our radar quite strongly. Again, it's one of those things we would consider unfinished business. I'm not going to say when we would release it. I certainly want to release it as soon as humanly possible, but I'm not necessarily the person in charge of the schedule. So it will happen when it happens, which I'm not promising for any particular time. With regards to Aviancy, I'm doing a TAP project at the moment, well not exactly at the moment, but I'm getting back to it so shortly, which I'm hoping to address some of that, and I'm hoping to bring some of the sort of Aviancy Armadillion lore in, but it will be in a relatively sedate TAP project style thing. It won't be this awe-inspiring quest, it'll be something small and comparatively simple.
There's a big distinction for us between Aviancy lore, which is very cheap to produce for us, and Abena, which is like the most expensive thing we can imagine.
Abena is really quite expensive because it's all these different floating islands and things. We have some technology to make randomized floating islands, but that, even though we've got the established technology, isn't exactly as simple as. It's quite a big project. I'm with you. I'm constantly going, hey guys, we haven't immediately thought about what we're planning next. Write a passage.
You, if you can help it, really don't want to do like budget Abena.
No, I mean, I want it to be the big.
Just for the sake of getting it out, you don't want to do that.
I want to do it justice, ironically, because Armadillo. Hope that answers.
Okay, last time we saw it, it was stuck in Stiskay's gut. So, is the siphon lost in the depths of the heart, or did someone get hold of it?
So, I'm not going to specifically answer that question, but I am going to point out that you had the staff, blacked out a bit, and then you didn't have the staff. That might not be entirely, an accident. There may be some deliberate purpose behind that, but I'm not stating what it is because I'm horrible.
It must have been Wahisatel.
Wahisatel! It wasn't Wahisatel. Necessarily.
No, I was here.
But yeah, it's not been forgotten. It wasn't a mistake or a bug, but I'm not going to say where it is.
Okay, so in regards to the...
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
So in regards to the Shadow Realm, is that something that's been deliberately created, or is that something that just naturally occurs? So outside
I'm not supposed to really talk about Shadow Realm.
No, we're not supposed to talk about the Shadow Realm.
I've always said too much.
Yeah, no. Those are mysteries which shall be revealed at a later
Struggy
date.
beard time, Struggy beard. Yeah, next question.
Do you mind if I asked two questions, just? Are there any plans currently to expand on the lore from the RuneScape novels?
I don't think we have any immediate plans to expand on the lore from the novels directly. We occasionally bring them in, but the novels are not stuff that we've designed and worked in-house. They don't immediately fit with our plans, so they're not something that we're immediately planning on using. We might reference them, but we're not going to drive the core story behind them, you see what I mean?
I think what we've said is we'll try our best not to contradict them, but if we do, the game will take preference.
Yes.
And if something fits naturally, then we'll make use of it, like Karamir appearing in Battle of Lumbridge, for example, how we made use of a weird during River of Blood.
Yeah.
So
Gerald.
Yeah.
Are there any plans to use Sally from the Idle Adventure game?
There are no plans, I believe.
I believe there might be a copyright issue involved in that. Because it was created by another company. I'm not sure if we actually have the rights to it. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure of this.
Yeah.
I don't think there are any current plans to, I believe.
Yeah, yes. I think there is a plan to specifically not. If
Yeah.
you see what I mean? And that may be a legal thing, I'm not sure.
I wouldn't expect it at this point in time. Is probably the fairest way to do it.
All right, so I'm aware that it might be difficult for you to answer this question seriously, but I just wanted you to confirm if my thought process was correct. So anima is delicious, it's what the Elder Gods are seeking. Brassica Prime claims to be the god of deliciousness. So therefore, does it not mean that the Elder Gods seek Brassica Prime? Okay, I just thank you all for confirming that for me. I just wanted to make sure I was right.
I think it's a subtle difference in what you term deliciousness. I mean, I was going to use the term nutritious, but that's also Brassica Prime. I'm not entirely convinced. I mean,
if you try to piece together the complex web of lore that we're weaving here, if you remember back, so you also said that carbon-based life forms were delicious. So maybe Brassica Prime is a carbon-based life form.
Yeah. I wouldn't assume that Brassica Prime is a core part of our Elder God storyline. How's that?
Wait till you see the cabbage of jazz.
It's the cabbage of 1,000 truths.
I really like this idea that Brassica Prime is the culmination of their great work.
Everything they have done, this perfect Gillinor creates a cabbage.
It's not actually Gillinor at all, it's actually Brassica Prime. And they've laid really tiny eggs on it.
All those hints about the 6th Elder God.
It's Brassica Prime. It isn't Brassica Prime. Oh, well done for asking that question. That's a very good question.
Hello, so I have two somewhat related questions. First of all, would you be willing to reveal the identity of the new Marshal of the Guardians of Armadale, seeing that Idria was killed in Ritual de Magia, which was a while ago?
So this is subject to change, key important thing. I have a new character for it that was planned for Rite of Passage, which is a character called Shavira. I won't say much more than that because, again, this is subject to change. Like if there's a more open things, it will replace it. But at the moment, in my head canon, it's a character called Shavira.
So this next one is, it's tangentially related. So we know that the Guardians of Armadale had residence within the Temple of Ikov. Guarding the Temple of Ikov was someone called a Fire Warrior of Lasarkis. And Lasarkis himself was a Magister of Terragard. So was Ikov a Magister as well, or did he have any, is there no relation whatsoever, just?
Ikov was not a Magister. It's not a sort of direct relation. It's a bit of a sort of troll thing on our part. It's the Fire Warrior of Lasarkis is a particular thing that I can't really discuss too much without going into deep Terragardian lore. I've written a massive document for all the people who work, but I don't think how much we can say. But it's sort of tangentially linked. It's not a direct, clear path, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. Okay, so two questions, one serious, one slightly silly. Best ones. In the player house, in your study, if you build the highest orrery, you get 2 planets. One's Gillinor with Xanaris, and one's another planet with 2 moons. Which one is it? And they're rotating around the same sun, so they've got to be on the same plane.
We discussed this coming up with this particular Q&A, didn't we? And we kind of just said,
is it going to be
wrong?
Is it going to be slightly deleted in the construction rework?
The orrery predates the cosmology that we're trying to build, which I realise is a slightly unsatisfying answer. It may or may not exist. It may or may not have an identity.
I mean, people come up with a variety of different theories to explain the world. Some people think the world is flat. Hey, we could also be wrong about that. And you got like the observatory quest, which is showing all these constellations. They happen to align perfectly to the zodiac in our world. That doesn't quite make an awful lot of sense. So people come up with different theories over time. Not all of them are right.
So it's been Vigorid.
Say again?
It's been Vigorid, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, okay.
I mean, there could also be a very interesting planet within within that plane. We just haven't.
Is it the
focused on
6th Elder God?
And his 2 little buddies.
I mean, if we have an opportunity to make the orrery make sense in the process of evolving the story in the future, we'll certainly endeavour to do so. But it's currently not significant.
And the next one. Madra ate food, but they regurgitate it later. Gods were once actual fully functioning mammals, kind of. So, do gods poop?
Well, we know the player doesn't poop, or at least if he's going to, he's only going to do it while you're offline, because there are no toilets. What's the question again?
Do gods
poop? They've physically evolved in a lot of ways that they're no longer the race that they used to be. So I guess certain attributes may no longer apply.
I mean, gods have the ability to do a variety of miracles. Theoretically, they could choose to maybe use their godly power to produce divine defecation. Maybe if Armadale wants to, have a go at Zamorak, he can swoop down, let one go on a Zamarakian statue.
On his car.
Because you're Armadale. No, my siege beast got poo in his eyes.
Yeah, they can poo if they want to.
Yeah, they can poo if they want.
They're gods, of course they can if they want to.
And who's going to stop them?
Yeah, exactly.
Win their life, win their
No,
life.
they go to war over it.
Why am I
Sarah
surprised?
Domin says jockey in my fortress.
Only Saradomin may poop on the soil of Gilliman. All other gods must cease.
Is this the cause of the original God War?
That
maybe?
must
That's
be
what it
it.
was.
I think we found the level.
Right.
Going back to Terragard real quick, how did the Fremennik fit in here? Were they part of the house system that split off when they were brought to Gielinor, or were they a completely different clan of people?
So you have to take into account the timescale of what's been happening with Terragard and what happened with Saradomin. Like we've established, Saradomin is an old god. And he originally was back on Terragard, and probably a bit before when they discovered the schism that you could travel through worlds, he would send people out to colonize other places. The Fremennik are one of these early colonies because Saradomin would have gone, off you go, do this, yes, and then he got bored of them and forgot about them. And so they will have adapted to form their own society, and the Fremennik society grew strong. If you look at Fremennik society, it has a lot to do with survival, that kind of thing. So it would have been a strong society to survive, and so they maintained those cultures, they maintained those traditions. That's where they come from, but they weren't originally part of the caste system, although there will be elements of their culture that will probably still retain from Terragard.
Modern Fremennik almost certainly don't have any of the traces of the Terragardians left.
None at all.
They probably don't even
Apart
remember that they came from Terragard.
Okay, so why is Khazad an all-powerful Maldra in a stalemate battle against a bunch of gnomes?
Because he's never had good mentoring. Yeah, now he can just wipe them all out. There, now we don't have to do a gnome finale.
Just kill all gnomes. I mean, I approve of this.
Or maybe that is the gnome finale. Khazad just kills them all.
No.
I mean, on the whole, he's not doing much of the fighting himself. He's amassed an army of humans and, again, is just leading them willy-nilly. Maybe if he went to war with the gnomes on his own, he might be able to do it.
Seriously, what is up with Weezidel? What's he actually doing now? Please tell us.
Weezidel?
Yeah, I can't pronounce it.
Well, Weezidel's kind of unhappy that everyone keeps ignoring him.
And he doesn't get enough Persquistana.
Yes, and I think Weezidel's probably unhappy about that. He's not the fanatically loyal one like Asanadra is, and maybe he's feeling a little bit unwanted and ignored, and perhaps questioning.
He's the middle child, really,
He
isn't
is,
he?
yes. Zaros hasn't done much to earn his loyalty recently.
Where has the eastern border of the Zerosian Empire been? So was it Canifes, or where the Slayer Tower now is? Or was it farther to the east?
Oh. I think it was... Sorry.
It's likely to be the Salve, I guess. So we've talked about Halavale being Saradomin's territory.
I would think it was probably some way east of the Salve. Because the Zerosians would have started to push in that direction.
I specifically talked about the area around what is now Morton. Would have been definitely Saradominists. Further north of that, potentially not.
It was probably an ongoing border.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Back and forth, yeah.
In fact, we have Vigora in the Slayer Tower, so that's certainly Zerosian.
Yeah, and somewhere
so there's probably a shifting border somewhere in between where Canopus is now.
He chose to build a really stupid monument there. So
yeah, absolutely.
It can't have been that in danger.
Is it possible that a perfect world doesn't get created? And if so, what happens then?
The Elder Gods will probably die out, I guess.
And the universe with them, most likely.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the question would be why wasn't it created? And the answer would either be the Elder Gods somehow disappeared before creating it, or
were fed up and just...
They never learned how to do so, and if they're so flawed that they can't even create that world, either they would also not be able to lay their eggs, or they would lay their eggs anyway, not realizing it wasn't perfect. And
I mean, you could have had like more of the sort of Ma kind of thing, of imperfect world, imperfect thing. So they would maybe become twisted and mad and different. So you do the whole kind of nightmarish version. Yeah.
There's a paradox where the more complex they become, the more energy they need to sustain themselves.
Yeah.
So they may be able to survive if they're in a simpler form with less energy.
If they found some way to self-sustain without having to keep redeveloping over and over again.
Yeah.
But as you said, probably in a more primitive form then.
But if you apply that logic backwards, what if that happened in the previous revision? What if that's what went wrong?
Maybe.
Yeah, I guess the best world that they can create during a revision represents the greatest strength that they can attain within themselves and pass on to the next generation. And if they fail to do that, then they're losing ground the previous revisions have managed to achieve.
So maybe perfect is relative.
Yeah.
The best they can do is all they can do.
Yeah, I mean, this is perfect because this is the best they managed to achieve in this revision, but they can most likely do much better than that in the next revision. They'll always be pursuing a greater perfection.
Yeah.
What they have isn't actually necessarily good enough as yet.
So there's a large group of us here who are curious as to when Saradomin can expect to receive his punishment for killing the cabbages in Edgeville in Death of Chivalry. Braska Prime bringing down the thunder, you know.
I mean, can't we just live and let live? I mean, I've given you the opportunity to replant that cabbage field, it all goes away, and you manage to rewrite history for yourselves. You know, let's just move on.
Just quickly, could I ask how many cabbages you've eaten?
Who's the real cabbage murderer here?
Okay, so 2 related questions. First of all, Vindicta is in Zaros's entourage in Endgame, alongside Azanadra and Char, so bunny ears and Bernie ears. Yeah, and so does she have any specific purpose mandated by Zaros, or is she just there as the sort of bodyguard?
She's largely there in Endgame as a bodyguard. I mean, she's pretty badass, and she's there to go, oh, you other minions, come on, I'll beat you up. And she's very short, but she packs a punch. And yeah, she was there basically to be bodyguard. I mean, we did want to have a bit more dialogue with her, but we had an enormous cast of characters, and by this point, translation were already going, stop it, because we had, I think it was 50,000 words by the end of it, which is like a novel-length amount of words, and they were just going, no more. So we had.
Why have you written 50 scenes and the players can only see 5 of them?
Okay, second question. Char, what's the ramifications of Endgame for her, seeing as her role assigned by Zaros was to just keep an eye on Sliske, and he's no longer in play as far as everyone's concerned?
I put a bit in Nex.
Yeah.
Angel of Death. She might go live with Nex. They can just hang out. Make marshmallows. On Char. Sleepover, yeah.
So another question about the cabbage. Basically, at the beginning of Endgame, Braska Prime said something along the lines that when you reach the cabbage of proof, it will be tasteless and withered. And when we reach the end of Endgame, the Stone of Justice exploded. So does Braska Prime see the future?
He certainly thinks he can see the future.
I mean, he would tell you he knows all things. For deliciousness flows everywhere, and therefore he gets all time flows through him as well. For time is very tasty. But canonically, no. He's a magic cabbage, he can't see the future. He certainly thinks he can, and he'll tell you all that, you know, he knows how the world truly is. But remember, he talks about giant space cabbages coming to destroy you all, so take what he says with a grain of, you know,
I thought I tidied up all these Braska Prime questions in Gower Quest. When Paul said, no, there's no Braska Prime, what are you talking about?
You can't kill the cabbage.
Oh.
The giant space cabbages will come for
I tried so hard.
Nope.
Watch out for mecha space cabbages.
Yes. So we learned that in the 5th Age, most people were Saradominus, and I wondered, with the gods returning now in the 6th Age, how is the distribution of religion among the different gods, and how many people can we expect to follow the different religions?
Is that in the 6th Age?
Yes.
I think they're largely still Saradominist. I think since the start of the God Wars, I mean, Zamorak appeared, got beaten, hid in a cave, went on a bank heist, Zaros is keeping to himself. Armadil isn't actively trying to convert anyone at the moment. So I think the human races is certainly largely still Saradominus.
People, particularly Saradominists, are fairly resistant to change. If things seem fairly stable and safe, they're probably likely to maintain the lifestyle that they're accustomed to. Of course, those that might have a better understanding of other gods being out there and other philosophies, maybe they'd be talking to some of those emissaries that be hanging around. They might look into other philosophies.
Yeah, the 5th age was particularly stable, I think, compared to the rest of history. The 4th age is very much a case of do what you can to survive, and humans came out on top. The 3rd age was just warfare throughout, and the 2nd age, again, very militaristic.
Yeah. I think if Zamorak had won the Battle of Lumbridge, I think maybe it'd be different, and he would have started to try to, while Saradomin was hiding, he would have started trying to convert people. But no one's really had an opportunity yet.
Right, I've got a couple of questions from YouTube. Any update on the Karamjan god? Anyone want to take that?
One of these things that's locked in Dave's head, I think.
Yeah. We've certainly discussed it. Again, we've never had the opportunity to expand on it more, I don't think. But we know who he is, and we can't tell you who he is, or what he's doing, and so on and so on.
Yeah, it's a kind of, we acknowledge your question, but we can't really do much about it. Question to Mod Stew. Are there any further plans to mix the Camelot and Temple Knights lore as planned some time ago?
That was something that I proposed as an idea I quite liked at the time. I got fairly mixed responses to it from players, and also was just pitching an idea of maybe the people in Camelot are actually a front for a Temple Knight base, and maybe that's where the Temple Knights headquarters was the general idea. No plans to implement that. Given that I had mixed responses from players about it, I probably would be leery of doing so anyway.
Are there any more from the field?
So the World Guardian is currently living in the 6th age, but we are still able to do 5th age quests, basically at a whim. I mean, I am personally planning to get my arm in a divination cape and then do the World Wakes, just for kinematic effect, but is there an actual in-game explanation other than, well, we're just remembering everything as it was, to why this is happening, why we can do 5th age quests? Well,
I mean, that is the explanation.
It's a
flashback,
5th age, right?
It's a flashback, 5th age quest.
Effectively, there is a canonical timeline, and you're just playing out of order.
Yeah. I mean, we could theoretically say, well, no, we'll knock you off from various skills and cosmetics based on where you were, but that seems almost mean and doesn't really add much to it. It's just the 5th age quest will only use stuff from 5th age times. They won't use divination, for example.
Generally, on the whole, I think if you play everything through in order of release, it's probably the best way to go about it if you're going in terms of story.
Yeah, if you want to make sure the story absolutely makes sense, then release order is the easiest way to do that.
Also, I should be releasing something soon to
the reworks.
Sorry. I tweeted out something a while ago where I was splitting up the quests by age. So there's a choice in the quest journal where it more clearly indicates which one's a 5th age, which one's a 6th age, which ones it just really doesn't matter. So hopefully that'll help with some clarity, as well as also adding in more suggested quest requirements to some 6th age quests to clarify that. So like for Missing Presumed Death, listing similar to World Wakes, things we really encourage you to play before that one to fully understand the story.
Just a slight point on what I said before, there are a couple of exceptions, like the Vampire finales we did recently, and if you saw RuneScape Reveals earlier, the Pirate finale, which is coming. Woo! Let's go!
Cool. One for you, I think, and possibly you as well. Can you tell us anything about what Hallowvale was like during the 2nd and 3rd age?
I was a mess in the 3rd age.
Well, yeah.
We were trying to piece together the timeline of that, and it's very confusing.
It is, man.
Because the vampires went into Hallowvale and messed it up. Meanwhile, Zamorak was being pushed back into Foreign-Free. So the vampires must have been like, no, we're not going to help.
I think we ended up saying, like, the Zamorak's territory kind of split off, so they were kind of being pushed back into Foreign-Free, and all the vampires were just kind of cut off. But they defended themselves well enough to establish themselves after the God War's finished.
Yeah. But possibly Drakan just betrayed Zamorak and refused to support him.
That's not to say that all vampires stuck there, because we've seen examples like Gogol's Dungeon at the very end of the Third Age still has a vampire presence.
Yeah.
Paul, I have a few questions here regarding Zautak. Did Sliske really found out who or what Zautak is? In Kindred Spirits book, he had no idea about him. In Endgame, he seems quite knowledgeable. He doesn't know, I don't know why I'm talking to you guys, he doesn't know specifically who or what Zautak is. He has done a bit more study since previous books, but no, he doesn't have like complete in-depth knowledge or anything. Any more questions from the room? There we go.
Yeah, hello. May I ask, do we know anything about Tusker, like how many commanders, generals he has?
Sorry?
Do you know Tusker?
Tusker?
Yeah. Do you know how many commanders and generals he has?
So Tusker's army generally is kind of self-built.
Yeah, it's not really. I mean,
it's
Tusker's
more,
a beast.
it's more in awe of Tusker going, wow,
Yeah.
let's follow that guy.
Tusker's not really strategic.
So yeah, it's the Irate commanders that are really running that army and sending the Harbingers forwards to kind of prepare a world for Tusker to come in and devour it, and then move on, and so on and so on. So it's kind of a self-managing one, rather than Tusker doesn't really care about.
Here's one for you. Do female Iceni all have 2 pairs of wings? Ziliana and Nefertiti seem to, but Garlandia doesn't seem to have lower wing stubs under her clothing.
It's remarkable how often I get asked about the wings. Feel free to chip in if either of you know something. I don't, but as far as I know, the wings are entirely, the lower set of wings are entirely cosmetic. Like we have, blonde hair, red hair, freckles, whatever. It's a genetic variation within Iceni, and it doesn't represent anything in their culture.
There was a discussion about there being sort of noble tiers of Iceni that I know we've had this conversation, but I don't think it's not officially canon.
Yeah, but not necessarily attached to their physiology.
I wouldn't. It's not necessarily that there are sort of 2 different like subspecies of Iceni, but perhaps it's a highly regarded physical trait, or it tends to occur within royal bloodlines, but not necessarily an indication of sub-races or anything like that.
I don't think we've actively tried to align it to their culture particularly strongly. I think often it's just a case of certain concept artists draw them with the low wings, other ones don't.
Maybe they fall off. I say going bald, I've gone bald. Maybe some of them just lose their wings. Yeah.
That must feel awful.
It's awful, yeah. One day you might realise.
I hope I never have to experience that.
Going all the way back to Temple of Sintistan, the Frostenhorn, what or who made it, and how did the Majorat get a hold of it to put it in Gorak?
Sintistan's probably your area of expertise.
Sorry, I couldn't hear all of that.
In the quest, the Temple of Sintistan, you retrieved the Frostenhorn for Azanadra. What or who made it, and how did the Majorat get a hold of it to put it in Gorak?
I don't think we know, do we?
I don't think we've specifically said anything. I'm going to say it's a demonic item. Someone brought from Infernus, one of the ice demons, well, the ice demon that has it.
Well, on Infernus, a frost artifact would be terrifying.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, what the hell is this?
Hi, a couple of questions here. Are we going to have a Dragonkin tie-in quest for mining and smithing?
Are we going to have a Dragonkin
tie-in quest?
Buying?
Tie-in.
A tie-in quest?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Not specifically, no. I mean, the rework is big and complicated enough as it is, without tying it into a quest as well. As to, I mean, I assume you mean, like, are we going to be trying to explain where this all came from, Dragon Armor, that sort of thing? For the rework, I would expect to do that. If we were going to do that, we'd do that through lore books. That's not to say there couldn't be, like, cross-references in later Dragonkin content. But we wouldn't limit one by the other.
Also, are we going to visit the Elysian homeworld?
Sorry?
Are we going to visit Aya?
What about Aya?
Are we going to visit it?
Are we going to visit it?
Yeah.
I would very much like to. Maybe.
Kind of same rules as Abena, right? Like,
Yeah, it's one of those, it's another world, so it's
Although
that kind of...
Aya is less exotic than Aberneth. So.
Yeah, we could show a smaller part of it.
Yeah, the answer to that question sort of depends on would you be happy if visiting Aya was sort of, we made a little section of grassland and said, this is Aya. If that's great, then we can do that really easily. If you want to see the full majesty of the planet, then that's quite a lot harder.
It's a similar situation we've had with Tarthiad and Frenesque and various...
And
Ubius is another example. So,
if you let us know that that's an unfulfilling way to visit our planet, then we won't do that.
There's plenty of other worlds we could do exactly the same for. Yeah. We've listed them off, and some of them haven't been developed at all, just been like mentioned. Yeah. And we've gone into a bit of it today with your cosmology talk, but again, there's a lot more work to do, I think, there on that.
Yeah. Okay, I have a question from YouTube. What is the nature of the primordial realm? It's one for...
I don't even remember what that is, I'm sorry.
So this is Sacred Clay?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Right.
I think...
So, yeah, I guess there's some crossover there where I think that may be another term for the Abyss, because the Abyss is where the Elder Gods, when they take apart material that don't need anymore from worlds, and they essentially discard it in the Abyss, and that sacred clay is what's used in
it could perhaps, what's referred to as the primordial realm could perhaps be a specific part of the Abyss, as with what we call the Abyss in game. It's a specific place, perhaps it's just a random discarded ball of clay, and they think it's a realm, but it's actually just a random bit of detritus.
Someone has a question here, which is what made the first Elder Gods? Which again goes back to that question of, we've had that previously, it's too far back to be
I think that question in particular is one we would never want to answer that, because it completely demystifies the whole concept. Yeah. Oh yeah, the Elder Gods were made by the Elder Gods.
Yeah. Who were made by the Elder
Gods? Oh, the Elder
Who were made by the really ancient, quite old gods. Let's not stop that. Do we have any questions here? Hello.
So we know that from Gnomish quest lines that many of the machinery in and out of Arpasandra was made by Gnomish and Elvish devices and magic, and I was just wondering if invention is going to be tied into the Arpasandra release quest, because we were promised a gnome and an elf tech trees, but we never actually got them, and I think it could be a good opportunity to introduce them.
The problem is that the gnomes are a 5th Age quest series. So the previous answer to that is they probably wouldn't tie an invention unless we move the gnome series to the gnome finale end bit to a 6th Age series. But that enters in a kind of that's even more confusing. That kind of.
I'm certainly in favour of doing that, but again, that's really a community question.
It's a community question of would you be okay for the sake of bringing invention into, and I'm not promising invention is part of any gnome series, but if of us doing that, would that be fine? Would you be happy with the crossing that 5th Age, 6th Age boundary?
Which finale sounds more appealing to you as a global community? Yeah.
Would you rather it be a 5th Age finale or a 6th Age finale / I don't know, reboot?
Sounds like a good thing to poll.
Well, yeah.
I don't think it necessarily has to tie into the invention skill itself either. Obviously, these contraptions and machines been built before any kinds of divine energy invention, which is largely what we've been building the invention skill from. So.
I would have said whether or not we do a gnome tech tree more depends on if we can find uses for it in the invention skill. Invention doesn't do very well when we sort of say, yeah, we're just going to put content in it. It's got to do something. We don't know what. So unless we can find a strong mechanical basis for that, we probably wouldn't do that. We wouldn't do that until we could find a hole for it.
If we found a batch of items that we could thematically tie to it, something, we could definitely do that. But again, that's based on some prerequisites there.
It could be just rewards, not necessarily skipping it to the 6th Age. I just thought it would be kind of relevant to the theme of the city and the machinery we already know exists there. Thank you.
It could be something as simple as blueprints. So I remember back when I finished that quest line, maybe I could do something with that.
We could do it like it's a 5th Age quest that then has a sort of 6th Age mini quest attached to it, where you just go to a guy and learn something. And 10 years ago, 1 year ago, however long ago it was.
Do we have any more questions? There we go.
So speaking of unfinished quests, with the theme of each energy dealing with a certain rune, are we ever going to have any callbacks to Elemental Workshop?
Maybe.
I think there's an extent to which we want Elemental Workshop to kind of be its own thing.
Yeah.
Because the name has such specific
I
expectations.
can't see it really tying into the Elder God storyline. It's about how those elements are used in the modern day, and it's very particular experimentation with elemental magic.
It's also very self-contained in that these are puzzle quests, and it all kind of revolves around discovering this one character, and each time you do another quest, you learn more and more about this dude and how he's been experimenting, rather than the grander scale of the entire game itself. It's very self-contained in that laboratory.
So I'm just looking through questions here. Do we have any?
Are there any plans for another world event?
Not immediately, no. World events are quite a big piece of work for short-term content, and they haven't historically resonated as well as we maybe would like, so there are currently no plans.
They make the storytelling incredibly confusing.
They really do.
They don't quite have the same effect that, say, holiday events have.
Yeah.
You can go in a holiday event, and if you finish it or you don't finish it, it doesn't really matter.
I mean,
and it's a similar kind of thing with world events, is that they're there for a while, and then once they're gone,
if we were to do world events, we'd probably we'd probably distance it from the core story and do it about. We could do like a big event, like a big kind of holiday event kind of thing across the game world, but I don't think we wouldn't tie it into like the Elder God storyline.
I think, the limited time events that we run are sort of doing that.
Yes.
And we're intentionally avoiding them being major story points for exactly that problem.
like Birth by Fire is a prime example there. Like, we introduced something to whet your taste buds, but ultimately doesn't really have a major effect.
So I'm just, the YouTube questions appear to be about Dalek invasions, which doesn't appear to be terribly relevant. So I'll turn to you guys again.
Are there going to be any references to Zautak in the pirate finale?
Are there going to be any references to Zautak in the pirate finale? I couldn't possibly say.
No, they're definitely
by
not.
Zautak.
What's a Zautak?
I don't know. What a Zautak? It's the best game.
Sorry. The way that it's quite loud. The way that I think has been done with the gods ever since they were introduced to up until this point is they're no longer quite the one-dimensional characters they were, where Zamorak was seen as evil, chaotic. He's now seen as sympathetic, more to the background side of Dolmen, not necessarily good. He's got a bit of a dark side. Same with Zaros, who was often quite seen as very, very popular for a lot of players. With the release of Slisky's Endgame, Children of Ma, there's a background to them that makes you think a little bit twice about the character, which is quite good. And the question that I'm asking is, what's happening in terms of more further development on the gods themselves as characters?
We were talking about this recently, weren't we? In that we don't really have any more strong villains, especially since Bandos died. Bandos was just a bad dude. Like, he had his reasons, and he was trying, well, he was just saying, yeah, this is me, this is what I'm doing. But he's still the bad guy. Whereas, because we've kind of gone sympathetic with some characters and others, we've lost some of that kind of, here's a guy to be opposed. So whether we kind of swing them back a little bit is another question. But again, there's a fine balance in how great you want your characters to be.
There's also an aspect of where we're focusing as a company. So right now our focus is on unfinished business, resolving particularly the 5th Age quests of the past and trying to bring up to the point where we feel there's a good line cut under the 5th Age so we can move on to the 6th. So inevitably that means that we put less priority towards the God quests for the moment.
So we've only got time for about 2 more questions. They're booting us out. So choose wisely.
And a question. What is the word shown on the Zaros God sword?
I've never questioned that.
No, I don't actually know.
Yeah, I'm afraid none of us know.
If you can find the same alphabet, you can probably work it out.
Yeah. I think we can probably add another question in because we're rubbish.
Is there any news about Demonheim or Floor 61 or any kind of lore like that going on?
There's been some discussion internally. It's not forgotten. There's a number of plans that people have, thoughts that people have. It's trying to work out what the right way to do it is. There are things that we could do, like we could just do another floor, but that would be kind of boring. So we're looking at like other things we could maybe do. We could
Is it like any chance of more sagas or things like that?
That is one of the options. We've looked at it. We've also considered things like a sort of narrative raid dungeon structure, and none of this is guaranteed. This is just us musing. This is literally, so it's in a brainstormy stage. People are talking and chatting and see what we can come up with.
Actually, one of the biggest problems with doing Floor 61 was always, well, would it have 120 dungeoneering requirements?
Well, yeah, there's some.
And then 4 years ago, that was sort of.
That was a mighty.
Can we really do that? And now, actually, there's enough people with 120 dungeoneering
yeah.
that doesn't sound insane as a piece of content anymore. So actually, it's changed a little bit.
It's definitely in the unfinished business list, but
Yeah.
we haven't got anything solid for it yet.
Probably do one more question because we did a really quick one. Anyone? There's one there.
Oh, we've nearly exhausted them.
I know.
Victory.
At what point should we expect the next kind of Elder God quest? Like in the next 6 months or in the next year or when?
That's a tricky one. It's scheduling is not kind of anything we immediately have any of that kind of control and answers over. It's on our radar. It's a thing we know players want. It's things that we're discussing. I couldn't give you a timeline, I'm sorry.
I think one thing is that after Endgame, we feel like we went a bit too much too epic. Like all of the quests in the Endgame series were attempting to be the biggest, coolest,
we were going for big, dramatic,
quest.
Super serious in terms
And we think maybe we want to dial that back a little bit for a while. Because if we just go straight on to, there's Elder Gods killing everybody and all the towns are on fire, and you go to, can we just have a bit of a break maybe for a little bit? So
it's not forgotten, but
I think you're likely to see non-Elder God quests before apocalyptic Elder God quests.
Okay. I think that's it. We will be around if you do have any more burning questions, but don't feel you can shout them at us. Just come and find us and ask us. We'll probably mill around the stage like we normally do. But hopefully you will have fun.
Cheers. Thank you.